Wow.
So was this exciting?
Yeah,
This
I
week?
liked it.
Yeah.
Did you like it?
It's okay.
Are we recording like you started to?
Yeah. I'm going.
Okay.
I'm
Wow.
going. I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Wow.
Wow. Now we've started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I should really get some coffee, actually.
Oh, you can go get coffee. It's fine.
Actually, yeah, pause. Then hang on. All right.
All right.
Now we're ready.
Excellent.
Yeah, so you thought it was boring?
No, I didn't think it was boring necessarily. We can get into it. I think that there's broadly a weird mix of what I see as things that are very context-based within music and subjective and physiology, and things that I wouldn't think would be physiologically determined.
Like what?
So one of the things he talks about in chapter 8 when he's talking about amusia and all these different musical things that some people don't have the ability to perceive. Dissonance, I feel like, was the strangest example, because to me dissonance is a highly contextual thing that is not it's very confusing to me that somebody's ability to perceive dissonance has anything to do with the physical makeup of their brain.
Right. Oh, so we should probably say before we get too further into this.
Yeah.
Is that we read Musicophilia
Yes.
by Oliver Sacks.
Right.
And we'll be talking about chapter 2, 3, and 8.
That's right.
Okay.
And I just jumped into chapter 8 has the most interesting things to discuss, I think.
Yeah, so like chapter 2 and 3 are basically about music epilepsy.
Right.
And what is it? Chapter 2 is about people that have
musical seizures.
It's the seizures, yeah. Well, so chapter 3 was about having music-inducing seizures, and chapter 2 was about having seizures where they hear music.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
Yep.
right. Which are both very interesting.
Yeah, kind of weird, too.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's interesting that you say that, because I feel like that's actually kind of what I've been trying to get you to realize with like consciousness and stuff. You know, is like realizing, there's actually, I don't know how anybody can think about anything having to do with the mind and not relay it back to the brain, you know, in some way.
Sure.
So dissonance, it makes a lot of sense that, even when you say context, it's like, well, what's forming the substrate of context is the brain. You know,
right.
So of course, dissonance
is going to be, to me is just a description. It's
a description of
something
what,
isn't.
You know?
Here, I don't think that things are objectively dissonant. I don't believe in objective dissonance, and so the idea of somebody's ability to perceive dissonance being like a neurological disorder doesn't make any sense to me.
But it's the idea that our brains. It is sort of subjective, but it's subjective in that our brains, for most of us, developed in a certain way that we're all hearing music in the same way, except for this subset of people.
Right. But you see, I don't even agree with, I agree with certain things. Like in chapter 8, he's talking about amusia, and the broadest idea that there's people who can't hear music. That idea makes sense to me. In the same way that I could imagine somebody seeing a painting, like we talked about, a painting of an apple, and not seeing an apple, but just seeing brushstrokes of different colors. It's a little hard to envision what they're seeing, but I intellectually understand what that means. Something like dissonance or consonance or happy or sad or anything like that, to me, those are not characters embedded in what they're talking about. Because the example they use is people who aren't able to perceive the interval of a second, which people who don't know music, that's two notes that are very close together that in a number of contexts are considered dissonant or discordant, but not all contexts. I mean, there's tons of contexts where it's not dissonant in normal classical music.
So I think we should get our vocabulary straight here, because I do feel like maybe we're talking about different things then. Because I mean, what was the context where he was talking about dissonance?
Let me pull it up. Because he was going through all the different forms of amusia, like like your inability to perceive timbre, inability to perceive melodies, or inability to perceive rhythm. Let's see. Where is it? Some of those make sense. So while I'm looking for it, all of these make sense to you?
Yeah, and you know, one thing I was going to specifically say is that, of course, you know, when you had a lot of them when they could no longer recognize music as music, you know, some of the cases that they talked about, they had either tumors or strokes or something in the auditory cortex and the temporal lobe. So, of course, that makes sense, because that's where, you know, basically you have kind of two ways that you can break down hearing.
Right.
You have conductive hearing, which is like when the sound wave gets to the ear, it conducts through the ear bones, and then it hits the hairs in the cochlea.
Right.
And you have like 3,000 something hairs that are each going to be tuned for a different frequency.
Right.
And then once that is hit into the hair, though, then it becomes a neurological signal. So it goes from conductive to sensory neural. Right. And so you can break down sort of hearing deficits as either conductive hearing deficits or a sensorineural deficit. So you can cure conductive hearing deficits much more readily by using something like a cochlear implant, where you're basically acting like the hair cells. Sensorineural can be cured, but it's a little bit more difficult if it's just within the cranial nerve 8, which is the nerve that actually picks up the sound. It can be a little bit easier, but once it gets into, you know, the auditory cortex and then all that stuff, obviously, as we've learned, you're going to get higher and higher orders of things and whatnot. It's going to be more difficult to cure. And so, like, when they talk about having a tumor in the auditory cortex and then you lose the ability to hear music, that makes sense to me, because this is going to be sort of, once you have taken in all the sounds, of course, you're going to do the actual processing in the brain. And then another thing that actually made sense is that they were saying how, like, rhythm is generally really difficult to lose, because it's actually like a very distributed thing. You're sensing rhythm with not just the cortex, but some of the subcortex, like the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, so like lower levels of the nervous system.
And there's tons of ways we engage in rhythm, both musical and non-musical.
Right.
I mean, walking is rhythmic.
Right. But then there were things like the ability to hear melody, and they were specifically talking about one patient that had deficit in this, I think a congenital deficit with this, and they found that she had issues in her the right inferior gyrus. And that is like near, so there's something called the somatotopic map of the brain, and meaning that you can actually point to certain regions in the brain and be like, okay, in the motor cortex, this area of the brain deals with moving the legs, and this area deals with moving the mouth. And the right inferior gyrus is near sort of the motor cortex component of where you are moving your mouth and vocal cords. So, like, it makes sense that this is the area where it's like it's involved with sensing people's pitch and everything like that, and also melody and stuff like that, because this is, I, again, have sort of said many times that I subscribe to the associationist philosophy of how the mind works, and the Lockean, Aristotle sort of theory that the brain, the mind is made up of the substrates of the senses. And so, of course, you're going to be corresponding things to what you take in and also sort of what you put out.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're going to be determining how other people are moving and what their pitches are based off of your own feelings of where your sort of vocal cords are and which ones are moving and whatnot.
I think that makes sense. I think that there's a melody is a complicated idea to me. And so what it means to hear or not hear melodies, I can't quite wrap my head around. Because to me, melody doesn't just mean one thing necessarily.
Right, but it's the idea of a linear sequence of sort of sounds. And again, he also couldn't wrap his head around it, he says, until he had his own sort of experience. Oliver Sacks, I mean.
To me, it's easier to not hear sounds as musical.
Well, but that's
than
still
to hear
sort of
some
melodic.
Sounds as musical. What did you say?
I mean, but that's still. I mean, melodic is always a linear sequence of things. Like every music has a melody to it, unless it's just purely rhythmic.
Right, but anything
obviously
could have a melody to it. Like it's just whatever you make in your brain. It's just like if you walk down the street, you're not associating everybody's conversation around you with music, but in theory you could. Like the whole thing about music is ordered pitch, kinda, but it's not ordered by somebody else. It's ordered by you. Like you are making music in your brain.
Yes.
It's just sounds in the air that you've put together.
Yes, you've organized in your brain, but that's I guess the point. Yeah.
So from that perspective, I get it. It is within your brain.
Right.
I'm just getting a little stuck on some things feel subjective to a point of it being like saying if somebody doesn't like cookies, there's something wrong. Like there's something in their brain. There's a disorder, like an A cookie liking disorder or something like that. When actually it could just be different people's perceptions lead them to have slightly different tastes and experiences of things.
Sure. And I mean, he makes a point of saying how when we're up until about the age of 6, we're all basically very open to whatever the cultural music.
Right.
And so, if you grow up in a culture of a specific type of music, whether it be jazz or Afro sort of beats or classical or Indian music, your ear and brain is going to be more tuned to those, and so you'll probably be able to, if you grow up in an Indian household and you're working with their 22 note scale, you'll probably be able to distinguish microtones better because it's not the same scale. Even though we all are in theory bringing in this, we have all about the same cochleas that are going to be receiving it. We'll be able to distinguish it more easily if we grow up in that environment. Right. And so I think you're getting hung up on maybe he's talking about dissonance from a Western perspective, potentially. Whereas, I guess, in some sense, dissonance is culturally determined, but I think what he's saying, though, is that for that specific person, something that was consonant became dissonant. So it is relative, Well,
so his example was kind of weird because the paragraph here says, there are yet other forms of amusia, all probably with their own specific neural bases. There may be an impairment of the ability to perceive dissonance. The discordant sound produced by a major second, for example, something that is normally recognized and reacted to even by infants. I mean, I don't think a major second, even in Western classical music, is in all situations dissonant.
Well,
I mean, there's gazillions of examples of like suspended second chords that are not dissonant at all.
But that's a second chord. So there's other things. He's, I think, just talking about the two frequencies in isolation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's by definition always dissonant, and so I don't know.
And the reason that it's used is because of the dissonance. You're suspending it to then be resolved into something.
Sometimes. I mean, sometimes not. It just depends on the context.
Yes,
but
of course. But you're bringing up the case of you're bringing up a more complicated case. You're bringing up the case of a chord, and he's just talking about playing those two frequencies, right?
Well, those two pitches.
Well, but what are pitches? They're frequencies.
Yeah.
What do you mean, kind of?
I mean, so a tone is a frequency. A pitch, especially a musical pitch, is like 1,000 frequencies.
Yeah, you have the harmonic, but that's what I guess I'm saying is that I think he's talking about a frequency in isolation, not because again, this is what he's saying is that timbre is exactly what you're talking about. It is not just that, central. It's all of whatever the idiosyncrasy of that instrument to create that tone is going to be. You're going to have the harmonic register and whatnot, and maybe some you have the third, you have the fifth, you have the octave, all to some degree, and maybe you have others depending on the instrument, and those are all going to be different levels. But if we're just talking about playing with just a computer, for instance, which I imagine would be the case if you're going to do an experiment like that.
Well, then like an octave can feel dissonant if you just have computers playing tones, because a tone, like a sine wave, is unpleasant to listen to for very long.
Yeah, well, again, I think that we're not going to get anywhere because we don't know what the study that he's referencing was. But I imagine...
Yeah. Well, he talks... So he says, Gosselin, Sampson, and others in Paris' lab have reported that loss of this ability may occur with a particular type of neurological lesion. They tested a number of subjects in discriminating dissonant from non-dissonant music and found that only those with extensive damage to an area involved in emotional judgment, the parahippocampal cortex, were affected.
Which is in the temporal
subjects
lobe.
were able to judge consonant music to be pleasant, but were but they did not show normal response to dissonant music, which they reacted to as slightly pleasant.
So, I agree he's being a little hand-wavy, but in there, we can infer he's already talking about a Western audience that has grown up. They're adults. They've grown up with a certain cultural understanding of what dissonant and consonant is within their milieu. And so the brain, as it being plastic, has then learned that these harmonies are going to be consonant and these are dissonant. But I agree. I mean, I don't know what the case would be if you just took 2-year-olds from a variety of different cultures and played, whatever it is, 230 hertz versus 234 hertz, and then be like, are they grimacing more?
Right. I mean, also that test is a little weird.
Yeah, but it could be done, and that would be the way to do it. Though is figuring out a way, or even just if they're verbal, just being like, "Do you like this?" And they'll tell you.
Right.
But I agree, it's going to be very different. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's still all physiologically based. It's just there is some time. There's incubation time for the brain to determine what's consonant, what's dissonant,
Yeah,
But that's neurologically based.
I think I agree with what you're saying. Everything is neurologically based at its root. But nobody would call it a disorder if you don't like Brussels sprouts and someone else does.
Yeah.
Or if most people like cookies and you just don't. That's not a disorder.
But we've already talked about this, that it is in some ways to say that from a clinical standpoint, because it's you're judging, quote, disorders based off of the norm. And we already talked about this with psychology. And neurology is obviously very close. So it's not to say that it's bad or anything, but he already also says how this, quote, diagnosis helped people, like this 76-year-old that he referred to that had amusia.
Yep.
She would have been happy to have had this diagnosis at 7 because then for all the cultural reasons that you're saying,
she wouldn't have to go sit at operas.
Yeah, she'd be like, "I'm sorry, but I
have a disorder.
I have a condition."
I mean, she probably should. She could have done that the whole time anyway.
She could have, but it's true. I mean, we do a lot out of politeness and you don't want to seem like the odd person out. But,
right.
Yeah, I agree, though. One thing that he didn't go into as much that I would have liked is because he quoted a lot of people, so it's not like he was taking a deep dive.
Right.
But, like, some scenarios, like what could have caused this, and and just other sort of symptoms about them, because I bet you there would be other weird things about these people that we just don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
A thing that stuck out to me, and besides the dissonance thing, was when he was talking about I believe it was the 70-something-year-old woman not able to distinguish high and low from each other.
Right.
And that's another funny one, because that is a super-duper culturally determined metaphor. And what's interesting is that when he's talking about the way that woman discussed music, she uses the word high.
See, I don't know if it is, because again, I think.
There are cultural groups. There's other musical cultures that use high and low to mean different things.
Okay, but
because there's nothing physical about, like if you play a low C or a high C, one isn't higher in the room.
Yes. If you're referring it to your vocal cords, so that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, this person had, I believe, she's the person who had, I think, like decreased gray matter in her right inferior gyrus, which, as I was saying before, is near the motor cortex component that innervates the vocal cords and mouth. Mm-hmm. So it's like that this is kind of what I was trying to say, is we do, I think, use that to sort of decide like high and low. And we've even talked about this, like as you sing higher, you start to go higher in your sort of throat, like you can feel like
right.
And versus as you go lower, you're sort of dropping your throat because I think you're loosening the vocal cords.
Okay.
So there is a physiological sort of determination of that. Whether you want to call it high or low, I agree, that's relative. But there's a linearity to it.
Right. But she uses the word high in description of music to mean something else. So what I'm saying is maybe she's not, because I've had students like this, they're not getting the metaphor of high and low in the same way that we are. So if I play a note at the top of the piano and the bottom of the piano, for me that's high and low, and for them that's like sharp and soft or something like that.
Right.
Like they're not connecting that metaphor. It isn't that they're not hearing those two different notes.
But this is where I'm saying maybe it's not a metaphor. Maybe they haven't made that connection between the vocal cords and the auditory cortex that you would want. Or in this case, the inferior gyrus. It
is a metaphor with the keys, because if you're not singing it, the piano doesn't have vocal cords.
Yes, I know, but that's why but it's a metaphor, but it doesn't need to be, is the point. It's not a metaphor for you, because you have imprinted this connection between your vocal cords and the pitch.
Sure. Maybe.
And this is actually would be, in my opinion...
There are dozens of cultures in the world that don't use high and low like that.
Yeah, that's fine. But they use some binary system.
But it's not always binary, and it's not always spatial.
Okay. Can you give an example?
We read about this. So gamelan music doesn't use the spatial high and low. There's a bunch of tribes in Africa and South America. Fast and slow are pretty common.
Okay, but that's kind of the same idea, because you have
similar.
Higher
it's getting at something physical for
right?
sure. Because fast and slow actually makes more sense to me than high and low.
Okay,
not physiologically, but physically.
And that's a binary system, by the way.
Yes, one uses like circular time or something. I don't remember. One of them was like thinking of pitch as a whirlpool or something like that. I don't know. I don't remember. It was this whole thing. It's like most pitch systems are binary. Some aren't, but they're not all high and low.
I bet you I just have this confidence that we could break it down into that.
Into high and low.
Yes. And
Sure.
it's just, I agree. It's whether you want to call it that, sure. But
I don't think fast and slow is the same as high and low.
It
because
is if
fast
you're
and
thinking
slow
about,
isn't spatial. It's
yes, it is. If frequency is spatial, it's the faster, the shorter distance
it's
between
not
the
dimensional.
waves.
Is maybe what I should say.
Well, that's space is a dimension. Okay. I see. Okay. Fast and slow are dimensional, though.
Are they?
Yes, because like I just said, a fast frequency has a shorter distance between the waves,
Okay.
and slow is a longer wave.
Sure.
So
All
that's
right.
a
Yeah.
distance.
Short, long. Then that's
Yeah, whatever
I think
you
that's
wanna
another
call
one.
it.
Yeah. What? But
Yeah.
that's not the same as high and low, is it?
Yes, for the reasons I just told you. It's just if you want to call it that.
But like when I'm saying high and low, I'm literally thinking like closer to my head or my feet. If I think fast and slow, I don't think that. I don't think that my head is faster than my feet.
Yeah, I mean, so I will agree that we can get into a different way of representing it in our heads, and in that case, maybe these cultures don't have the same connection to the vocal cords that we do, or maybe they do, and they're just representing it differently. Because again, as your vocal cords tighten, they're
Right.
going to vibrate faster, and that wave is going to be shorter, right?
Right.
Versus if they are lower pitch. So it's just how you want to think about it.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yes, but okay.
That's my point, is that the way that you think about it is contextual and at least somewhat culturally determined. And so your inability to see whether something is high or low, there's a confusion in that, because there's probably not something built into your brain with the high and low metaphor necessarily.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So maybe she's not seeing the high and low, but she says high
She's saying
later.
something
Like
else.
high music bothers her, and what I'm imagining she means is like loud or very intense or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. And
Right.
for all we know, they asked her more questions to get at that kind of stuff.
Right,
You
right,
know?
right, right.
And also the fundamental thing was, as she described it, is like, what do you hear when you hear music? She described it as like pots and pans.
Right.
You know? So it was clear that she wasn't making them out.
Right.
As with, he talks about a person at the end of the chapter who basically, I think she had a car accident.
Right. Yeah, the composer. Yeah.
Yeah, the composer. And she would make out all the voices, but she couldn't integrate them into something. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, it's true. There's complicated natures to all of this, but one thing is that it's different from, I guess, again, the norm of whatever that society is. Sure, maybe if she went to Gamelan, someplace where Gamelan was like the big thing.
Well, because like my
she'd be
grandma
"Oh, this makes
talks
sense."
about
Yeah.
gamelan being essentially just banging on pots and pans, and that's
Yes.
what she hears.
Yeah.
So is she a music with respect to that music? And then
Maybe.
is that like a lesion on her brain, or is that a cultural thing?
It's not. Yeah, I would say it's not a lesion. It's just a difference in connectivity. So
Right.
this is where I agree. It gets really complicated, and so this is maybe a good place to start talking about the seizures.
Sure.
So we'll we'll do this in reverse. This is good though. I think you always come in saying I don't know how, and then we always have very spirited discussions.
Yeah. I feel like I just don't know science, and so I'm just coming in like I have no idea.
and
it just doesn't sound right.
I know, and I could do a better job explaining.
I think you do a fine job explaining. I think what you're saying makes sense.
But I think I should stop assuming that you think the same way as me. I think I'm doing a bit too much of that, just like maybe Oliver Sacks was assuming high and low, right? But anyway, with the seizure stuff, and so this, I think, really illustrates how everybody's brain is wired differently. And so what are seizures? Seizures are basically just electrical events that occur in the brain that are sort of, I would say, disorganized. And, the best example is the grand mal seizure, which is basically you have a loss of consciousness followed by convulsions. And so these convulsions are going to be, basically your body's moving in a variety of different ways, unregulated. You're not conscious. Mm-hmm. And if you were to look in the brain, what's going to be happening is your motor cortex is going to be firing in a really cacophonic, in just a really disorganized and dysregulated way. Mm-hmm. So, seizures you can classify them in a bunch of different ways, but really you can either think of them as focal or general, meaning does it start focally, or is it like a general sort of electrical storm? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you can have a focal seizure that turns into a general seizure, and and when I say general, it's meaning that it's both hemispheres, or like subcortical and cortical, that would be a general, whereas a focal would just be like in the temporal lobe. So I say all that just to mean, when we're talking about these people that are hearing music and generally, I guess the other thing you should say is people have triggers for seizures. Sometimes the trigger isn't realized, but sometimes it is. And in the cases of Chapter 3 that we were discussing, the trigger was certain type of music or tones or rhythms, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these are going to be, the preliminary thing is going to be something called an aura, where, and so in this case, the aura was music in Chapter 2, meaning it's like right before they have the seizure, something happens. The other people, you have they'll smell something. It'll be like a smell that they always smell before they go into the seizure, and then it's kind of like a tick. It tells you you're about to have a seizure. Right. So the reason that I think the music is really interesting, but also complicated, and it makes sense that it was different for everybody. Like, for one person, they would be hearing classical. They heard like a violin that was like kind of reminiscent to their childhood. Mm-hmm. But another person, it was, I don't even remember, but it wasn't that. It was different. Mm-hmm. And then in the case of the music inducing the seizures, it was a variety of things. It was like some people, it was classical music that induced the seizures. Some people, it was a rhythm. Some people, it was like a particular tone. And this all makes sense that it would be so variable, because it's, again, our brains are highly wired very differently as we get older. And so, of course, the stimulus that induces the seizure and also is going to be very determined by the precise wiring that we have. So yeah, that I guess I was just wanted to say all that, because it was also making me think how I wonder if you could actually, because again, you could train yourself out of this somehow by, you just need to change the wiring of the brain, right? Which is why there's a variety of ways you could do that. But one way would be potentially, and again, it wouldn't be, I don't even want to say, actually. Let me not get into that.
Oh, no.
Well, because it's like, I'm not trying, this is not medical advice and all that kind of stuff. But I think that's why people would use like electroshock therapy and stuff like that. Now, the way we treat seizures more and more are putting an electrode in the brain where the focal, if you can determine where the seizure's starting, you can put an electrode in to sort of try to discharge it. Because it's like it's like a cascade, or what's the word on, it's like if you can stop it from propagating, the electrical impulse from propagating in that particular wave, you can kind of stop the seizure from occurring. Right. But it's like somehow the brain gets this one connection that's really long that ends up sort of firing all these other neurons at once in an uncontrolled manner. That's how I think about seizures. Right. And so if you can somehow change that connectivity, then you can stop the seizure from happening.
Right. That's cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
it is cool. I had no idea.
Yeah.
So one thing I was thinking when you were just talking now, especially with something like a musical trigger.
Yeah.
What I was thinking about is how when you're practicing music, how you can sort of inadvertently practice a mistake.
Yes.
And get really, really good at doing that mistake.
Yes.
Is that a plausible thing that could be happening where, like, their brain has sort of a seizure has happened, and it's some trigger is sort of triggering that code to run, that sort of mistake code, where the brain is kind of like malfunctioning or something like that, and they're caught in, like, the brain has learned that that's a thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah, because so this is where it goes back to Donald Hebb, who put out this theory, the Hebbian learning model, which is that neurons that fire together wire together, or neurons that wire together fire together.
And so it's good that it's pretty snappy. It rhymes.
Yeah.
And if it rhymes, it's true. It's a rule of mine. Anything that rhymes must be true.
Yeah. And it's like Murphy's Law.
Something like that.
And so, and it makes, and we've sort of confirmed this at the I guess you could say the microscopic level, with this thing called long-term potentiation. And so it's the idea that the more that a neuron fires on another neuron, they're going to actually increase their connectivity. And so it'll be easier to fire on that neuron again. So that's exactly right. Somehow you have this connection, this aberrant connection that causes a seizure.
Right.
And then somehow, in the case of the music, this tone got associated with that. And it's like, who knows how? Because it's like, when I think about the brain, it's just, I'm picturing a web. Like, you have one web that is the seizure web, and then you have another web that's like the music web. And then somehow, one of these neurons gets connected, and now you fire the music web, and then it will initiate the seizure web of neurons. Right. And the seizure web of neurons shouldn't exist also. Somehow that formed on its own too. And that's a very good question of we don't really understand how that happens.
And is there any adaptive explanation for seizures?
Well,
like, is there any reason why we have seizures?
Well, some people... Well, I would say the adaptive reason... I think it's an aberrant thing that occurs from how our brain works, which is why I was bringing up the association. It's like our brain works through associating things, and as we associate things together, those connections become greater and greater.
Right.
But then somehow we can accidentally associate a pattern that leads to a seizure.
Right.
So it's like, all the seizure is you're firing a bunch of areas that shouldn't be firing, and they can either sort of short circuit and cause you to lose consciousness, or they can short circuit and cause you to start convulsing. But yeah, I mean, I think of it more as just the downside to having a really sticky mind.
Sure.
I mean, in
but
terms
animals
of,
can have seizures, right?
Yes. Yep. I would say some people talk, and again, this person who had the musical seizures was talking about how they kind of missed it because it was like the music was also, it was hitting another web of like memory, right? And which is why it was reminiscent of like something from their childhood.
Because a seizure, like a loss of consciousness being tied to memory, it's just like really weird.
But again, it's just this idea of if you have one web that is all that like is the music web. Right. And then you just have another web that's like childhood memory web. Mm-hmm. And if they just get connected, that's all it takes.
Right.
So if you were which is why it makes sense that like if you were listening to some like violin a lot as a kid, you're already going to have that connected. And then if that gets connected to a disorganized seizure web, then, then you've got it. But I was just going to say, I mean, some people talk about like having like creative impulses in the aura, right? And stuff like that. Because the aura is, it's just like you're going to be thinking about the world differently. Whether or not you remember it after you have the seizure, though, is the question. But, I don't think that's adaptive. But I guess that's one maybe, quote, good thing you could think of that would come from a seizure.
I don't even mean a good thing. I just mean like if I've read that there's at least people who propose that depression is an adaptive response to certain types of situations. Anger, like most emotions have at least understandable reasons why they happen. Yeah,
I think it's a byproduct of the brain's function. It's like because we have a brain that's associative, this is a natural thing that would happen.
It can happen, right?
If something goes, if wires get associated that shouldn't be associated.
Wires. Okay, so. A separate question, a conversation that I have a lot that my wife likes to bring up is the metaphors that we use to describe the way our body works over time and our brain specifically. And how they change over time with whatever the most advanced technology is in our civilization. Mm-hmm. So brain functioning used to be described more like a steam engine. Mm-hmm. And now we talk about wires and networks and things like that. How much of that do you see as metaphorical representation to describe a system, and how much of it do you see as literal?
Well, it's literal in the sense that it's electrically, like, it's electrical, like. There is an electrical impulse that's traveling on the neurons. They are wires.
They are wires.
Yeah.
They're just not copper.
They're just not copper, but they are conducting. So yeah. I mean, I guess that's pretty literal.
Like when people say our brain is a computer, kind of a thing, or people say our brain is a steam engine.
Right. Yeah. Did they used to say that?
I believe so, in the early 1800s.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring that up because actually, so David Hartley, that guy, he was an 18th century physician, philosopher, and he wrote this book where he basically tried to fuse Locke's associationist theory with Newton came up with a vibrational theory for how information travels on neurons. So to kind of your point, he was thinking about it in a metaphor very common of the day, which was vibrations, because everybody, this is when all the great... Well, and this is when all the great, like, classical physics stuff was being done, like the spring, physics and Hooke's law and all that kind of stuff. And so I agree. Maybe like we'll find that there's like some nuance that we're not realizing as we progress, and we'll come up with a better metaphor. I mean, I've read articles about people saying, don't call the brain a computer because it's not a computer for a variety of reasons. So I agree. It's not exactly like a computer.
Like it's just, I wonder how we'll be describing it in 200 years, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I think wires are a pretty good metaphor, though.
Right.
Except for the fact that wires don't have the same association stuff, whereas like a wire that fires on another wire doesn't strengthen its connections by doing that. So, I mean, there's one difference right there.
Right.
But I feel like that's always kind of how we
Right.
conceptualize the world. I agree, though. It could become a hindrance, though, if you...
I mean, I don't even know if it's a hindrance. I just think it's...
It can be. Because
I like
your
probing
thinking, right?
where things are metaphorical and where they're literal, kind of a thing. Because I think that we tend to speak a lot more metaphorically than we think we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, you could...
I mean,
you could say,
there's the Foucault, there's everything's a metaphor.
Right, I was just about to say. Yeah.
But sometimes, if I say I'm eating an apple, I don't mean it metaphorically. Whether or not, the word is a representation of a thing and all of that, my meaning is not metaphorical. But if I say the brain is a computer, I mean that metaphorically. But not. I don't think everybody does.
Well, yeah, and I mean, this is where I was going to say how everything is kind of a metaphor, or rather, everything is inexact to some degree. Some things are just more inexact. Like, I agree, there's not a lot of room for error when you discuss eating an apple. That cloud of meaning is pretty small. It's got a pretty small
But what does he
tail.
mean by apple?
Yeah. Well, yes, exactly. And I mean, are you eating the whole apple or, just part of it? Right. But yeah, when it comes to greater, and this kind of gets at going back to the music thing and how the brain works, and we could talk about this more, is that when you learn about the brain, you learn about primary sort of sites and secondary sites of information processing and tertiary sites. So it's like vision.
Sites like a place.
Yes. Yeah, like a physical place in the brain. So the primary visual cortex is at the back of the brain in the occipital lobe. And then as it progresses towards the front, you go into the secondary visual cortex and the tertiary. And as you get further away from the primary, you get closer to other areas of the brain. And so these sort of areas in between primary sensorial processing centers are where you get a lot of, they're called association centers, like specifically in the parietal lobe, they're called this. And it makes sense because this is where you're like, basically you're slowly associating more information together from the base substrate of the senses, which is again why I keep going back to being like, I very much agree with, like, sensory perception forms the base of our minds. I even wrote it in a song, Antushka. And the same thing with the auditory. The auditory cortex is, as you go further away from it, you'll start to lose the higher order processing of sound where you get to music, which is why, like, I was actually kind of surprised that music was so close to the auditory cortex, because I think they said with this one guy, they took out like a glioma or something in near the temporal, the auditory cortex in the temporal lobe. But I think it's just the idea that it seems like you have a lot of your musical memory is in the temporal lobe. So, yeah, I mean, just from what they were saying, how when they took it out, he sort of regained his ability to compute music.
Right.
But yeah,
my grandpa has a cochlear implant.
Nice.
And he can't really hear music anymore.
Yeah.
He said that it was the biggest, like, it was super depressing for him.
Yeah.
And, like, he almost wishes he didn't have it anymore. He said at first everybody's voice sounded like a robot, so he had to relearn how to hear people's voices.
Right.
And music is just, like, really irritating to him.
Yeah, so I mean,
doesn't sound like music. And, like, birds chirping is irritating.
Right.
Like, anything that's a massive noise is just, like, he said it's like static in his head.
Right. So this goes to the limitations of, I wonder how old his cochlear implant is, because we're getting better and better at this.
It's like 5 or 6 years old.
Okay. But, he actually, Oliver Sacks had a subtext about the cochlear implant, discussing how, again, we have like 3,000 hair cells, I think, and each of those are tuned to pick up a frequency. Whereas the cochlear implant is I think it's limited. The spatial resolution is limited by you can't put the wires too close or else they start interfering. So it's like 16 electrodes or something, but I imagine it's smaller than when he was writing this in 2006. Like we are able to put more electrodes on here.
Right.
But still, I doubt we're up to 3,000. And so the point is, I think you're doing a lot of digital processing of the information, but it's still probably not good enough to resolve 3,000 frequencies.
Right.
Which is why music is going to be really difficult to hear. And you're not. Yeah.
And it's more than frequency too, isn't it? It's also spectrum. Like our ears are filters. Because two different birds could be chirping at the same frequency, but if they're a different size bird, it's going to sound different, and we're going to even be able to tell. It's like like an oboe and a flute can be playing the exact same note, and we can tell that one's an oboe and one's a flute even at the same time.
Yeah, no, it's true. Though a lot of the spatial stuff occurs in like the brain stem after the cochlea.
Right.
So,
what I'm saying is we must be getting more than just blanket like frequency data.
Yeah. Yes.
It can't just be a table of numbers.
Yeah. No, I mean like the loudness and stuff like that's going to be
the loudness,
affected.
But also the spectrum has to be important.
Well, the spectrum is what I was discussing. When I talk about frequencies, I'm talking about the spectrum.
Right.
Frequencies are the spectrum.
Yes.
So it's definitely affected.
Right, but like we're getting a whole series. We're getting like gazillions of frequencies.
Right.
And then we piece them together and say like, this bunch is that bird, and this bunch is the wind, and this bunch is like the dog barking, kind of a thing.
Right, but you can see how that's. I guess what I'm equivocating about is whether he has lost the ability to piece things together, or if his ability to piece things together is perturbed by the fact that he's not able to distinguish between frequencies as easily.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think that's the issue, because what I'm getting at is everything after the cochlea, so, from cranial nerve 8 in, should be intact still, unless he has a sensory neural issue, which I don't think he does from what you've said. So all of that, though, should be just perturbed by the fact that he can't make out the same number of frequencies. And yes, I imagine also like the loudness of certain frequencies is going to be affected. Yeah. And so I guess I'm agreeing with you is that there is still a lot of information that I think we're picking up just based off of what frequency is being hit at what time and how loud is that frequency. All of that is important information for piecing things together. Right. And yes. Yeah. So I agree with that. That sucks. Sorry to hear that about him.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because is it both of his ears then?
I don't remember. I mean, he's very deaf. I mean, it basically doesn't help though. It's like he still can't hear you. But.
Yeah. Maybe he does have some sensory neural
I don't know.
Stuff too.
Yeah. I mean, he's been deaf. I don't remember the different distinctions, but he's had a hearing aid since I was a kid.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Because like I have, my parents have a friend who's got a hearing aid. And he still goes to concerts and has an enjoyment of music and everything.
Right. My grandpa used to. It was the cochlear implant was really the turning point where he couldn't take music anymore.
Right.
Before that, he couldn't really hear it. He could only hear bass frequencies. So he would like listen to music with a subwoofer and stuff and just enjoy the like boof, boof, boof.
Right. Well, and of course the hearing aid's going to be different than the cochlear implant, so yeah.
But the hearing aids weren't doing anything anymore. Like they stopped helping.
Right.
He was too deaf for that.
Yeah, well, and so that's another sort of good point is that your high frequencies go first. So everybody sort of has some sort of, it's called presbycusis, where you lose high frequency
Right. Mm-hmm.
because just the way that the membrane in the ear that the hair cells are on, the high frequencies are hit first. So it's like all, and then the lower frequencies are picked up at the end of the cochlea. So it's just everything's hitting the high frequency hair cells.
Right.
And so those are going to be the ones that are sort of responding the most. At least that's how it was described to me. I guess I don't know if that's, that was how it was described to me. So take that with a grain of salt.
I don't know. I believe you. I have no idea.
Yeah, they are the first ones that are hit in the cochlea.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah, but I was just thinking, like, I mean, what would you do if something like this ever happened to you? It would probably be very frustrating.
It would be very frustrating. Just start making robot music.
I wanted to know, so chapter 8 ends with how this composer who was in a car accident and then lost her ability to distinguish, basically hear music,
right,
then regained to some semblance her ability to hear music, and it was due, and then this is kind of what I was saying about like how we connect like our vocal cords to our like the auditory process of our brain. She was able to regain her ability to think about music when she started playing piano. So what is that? Again, so the hand is also very close to it's closer to the middle gyrus, but you know, it's I guess just
it's the same thing. I think that it's a pretty normal thing. We all have that, you know, when we're doing ear training in school. If you can kind of connect the sound you're trying to get to the frets or the keys or whatever, if you can kind of get yourself to feel it physically in how you produce it as a musician with your voice or your fingers or something, it's easier to imagine kind of a thing.
Yes. Yes, and I mean, this is what I was going to say, this is why exactly singing while you play and having your students sing while you play is probably one of the best exercises they can do if you want to develop their ear.
Yes.
So I hope.
Although young students will argue up and down about how they play guitar, they don't need to sing, and they don't buy it.
Yeah, and that's fine, but tell them they'll be bad musicians. Just tell them
there will be bad musicians. No, what's his name? This is like sort of off topic, but John Mayer had a video that was out. It was like a clip I saw a couple weeks ago, and it's stuck in my head because he was talking about how most guitar solos are really boring, and I think it's true. And he was saying that his reasoning for that is because they're not playing anything that you would sing, and so it's not memorable. It doesn't connect with people. If you just run up and down a scale really fast, that's like cool a couple times, but it's definitely not memorable.
Yeah.
But if you're playing a line that you would sing, everybody can kind of feel what you're doing.
No, that's a very good point. I like that.
Yeah. And so I've been trying to think about that, about playing vocally.
Yeah, I think that's very good. I mean, do you sing a lot when you play?
What do you mean?
Like singing the melody. Do you sing along to the melody when you play?
No, I should.
I started doing that more, especially when I was trying to learn more songs. And actually, like, was playing songs where the melody part was difficult enough that I was like, I'm not singing this right, so I would try to work out the melody and then I'd sing along to it.
That's good. Yep.
Yeah, it helped a lot. And I know my brother, when he started taking jazz lessons, the jazz teacher that he had was really big on having him sing the scales as he did them. And I think he's sort of definitely agrees it was like it's been really helpful for that.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that was fun. I thought that was good. Yeah.
The other interesting point that he made in chapter 8 about rhythm and pitch being different parts of your brain is interesting, because the high levels of music theory talk about how pitch and rhythm aren't actually distinct. They're really different sides of the same thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I mean,
Because
yeah, it was-
harmony is the relationship between pitches, which creates a rhythm. So like the frequency beating pattern between a C and a G would be 2 against 3. So the idea is that harmony and rhythm is harmony. Rhythm is just harmony at a very slow pace, and harmony is very fast rhythm.
Sure.
And then pitch is just is a frequency, which is also a rhythm.
Yeah, because I was gonna get at that of like, it's still all. I guess rhythm is just time, whereas sounds are space and time for the reason we already said.
Sure.
That there's a distance associated with each frequency. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, so it's like, I think it's that if you have right-sided lesions, I think it's specifically in like the right temporal lobe, you'll get tonal abnormalities, right?
I thought right was rhythm, but maybe I have it backwards. I don't know. One of them was rhythm, one was pitch.
I thought rhythm was more difficult to lose.
Yeah, but he gave it a side, and arrhythmia was one of the amusias. I don't know if I can find it again, but
oh yeah, but especially after a left hemisphere stroke, one can develop profound forms of rhythm deafness without tone deafness.
Right.
Yeah. So good call.
I mean, what's interesting is I've had a lot of students now, who I would say I don't know if they have lesions on their brain.
Oh.
This is the thing. But
He does go on to say, in general, just as after some right hemisphere strokes, a patient may develop tone deafness without rhythm deafness. In general, though, forms of rhythm deafness are rarely total because rhythm is represented widely in the brain.
Right.
So that's what I was remembering, at least.
Yeah. So the rhythm one is weird to me, but I've definitely had students, and I don't know if they've had a stroke on the left side of their brain or not, but teenagers or children who don't seem to have the sense or the ability to figure out how to even like snap a pulse. They don't understand what a pulse is, which is always funny to me because they can walk. So they can. Like they physically can do a very similar activity. So it strikes me like they must be able to do this.
Right. Yeah, no, yeah. That's interesting.
I mean,
so
the thing is, if you're rhythm deaf, I would imagine that it would be really difficult for you to do something like walk, and your walking would be kind of funny.
Is their walking funny?
I don't know. Not these kids, and I don't know about the examples that Oliver Sacks is talking about because he doesn't go into it. But.
So how do you teach them rhythm? Just clapping, I guess, to a metronome or something?
Yeah, we try that. Try clapping to a song they like. I don't know. Try just counting. Sometimes it'll just be like, count to 4. And like I'll try and find it and see if they have a pace. Because most people won't go like 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of a thing.
That's a good idea, though, yeah.
Because sometimes kids, I think sometimes it's just that they're embarrassed and they don't want to get into anything, and so they clap in a really like weird stiff way that's like nobody could clap in time. It's like, no, you gotta like loosen up.
Yeah. Huh. That's funny.
But yeah, anyway.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's interesting. So you want to stay on this book? I'm down to.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's pick some.
Unless you had something else that you wanted to read for
that's
next
fine.
week.
I didn't come in with an idea of what else to talk about, but
well, we can. I mean, if it's up to you, we can decide it now, or if you want to think about it and just let me know, that works too.
Well, if we go through the table of context, are there any topics? Absolute pitch, I guess, is an interesting one. I wouldn't mind doing that one. Chapter 9.
Yeah, I imagine it's going to. Yeah, or even let's just cochlear amusia, pitch imperfect.
Yeah,
from what we were talking about. So 10 might be a good one too. So yeah, you want to just do those two?
Sure. Aphasia
or music
and
amnesia
therapy.
might be memory.
Music and Tourette's syndrome. That sounds interesting to me. I haven't read that far into the book yet, so. Rhythm and movement. How about that? How about keeping time?
Okay, where is that?
19.
19? Okay. So we'll do 9 and 19?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you want to do the cochlear one, we can try and add that one too.
Yeah, I guess if there's time, but I would say prioritizing 9 and 19.
Okay, cool.
Sweet.
Cool.
Do we
Yeah,
wanna
I'm a
call
little
this-
over the synesthesia conversation.
Oh, yeah, it's okay. Do we want to call this 17, episode 17, or should it be 16.2? Because last episode
Yeah,
was...
so do we do it by text or by, like, author?
Well, if we do it by author, that means that if we do, like, Nietzsche again, we'll call it whatever.
Like 4.25.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny. Let's do that.
You want to do that? So this will
Because
be
we might go
6
back to episode 4 or 5 or something like
Right.
that. Yeah.
I was actually thinking for an organization standpoint, it also makes sense to...
Sure.
Okay, so this will be 16.2.
Great. I
All right.
love it.
Sounds
Yeah.
good. You're
Also,
picking not just this next one, but also the one after this, just to remind you.
I'm what?
Because I figure even though we're sort of like running around books, I think we should keep like I do 3 weeks and then you pick 3 weeks kind of thing.
Oh, okay, so I got to pick an article or something next.
Yeah, or just another thing from this book.
Okay. I don't think I want to do another one from this book, but...
Okay. You're done with Oliver Sacks. I do kind of agree. I was going to say this. I forgot reading this how much of a sort of what's the word? He's just like the quintessential intellectual, I guess you could say.
Right.
Metropolitan.
But there's not even that much to dig into.
No, but it's just the way he talks. He's like, and then I was playing a Chopin mazurka and
I know.
drinking sherry. He's like a modern day Frasier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just funny. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so we'll do one more on him and I'll pick something else.
Cool. All right, sounds good. And you had a good gig?
I had a good gig. Oh,
The big gig.
I mean, it was crazy.
Yeah.
It was insane. Did I tell you about it? The wedding gig?
No, you didn't.
Oh, yeah, it was nuts. So I get there, and they're like, "Oh, you've never played with Jordan, who's the band leader, one of the owners of the company." They were like, "Oh, you're
Should I
in for a
bleep
wild
the name?
ride." What?
Should I bleep the name?
I don't know. I don't have anything bad to say about him.
Okay.
He's not listening, but if he is, he knows. Like it's not like he was a bad band leader. It was just crazy.
Yeah.
So we had like 250 songs to learn. There was a mandatory list. We do sound check. We do 4 songs that aren't from that list, just other songs. So it's like, okay. And then we do the first set, the first hour. No songs from that list still, just other stuff.
How did you pick this up then?
They have a master chart list of like 5,000 songs.
Gotcha.
And I'm happy that I downloaded it to my iPad just in case. Because I made a list, I made charts for the mandatory songs for myself because their charts are crazy and hard to read and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, oh my God. And so like he would just say a song and I would just look it up in my iPad. I was like, oh, thank God. That's in there. And then one of them wasn't in there. And I'm like, what is happening here? And like, it wasn't a song I knew. It wasn't a song I'd ever heard in my life.
Uh-huh.
And most of these songs were songs I didn't know at all. So I was just like hoping to God that none of them started with a guitar solo. Because I was just like, you got me. I don't know what this song is.
That's terrifying.
One was like some Shaka Khan song that I'd never heard. Just like, oh my God. One was a John Mayer song that did start with a guitar solo. And thankfully, that chart had the guitar solo written out. So I was able to like read it. It's just like, I'd never heard the song. It was called Love on the Weekend. I've never heard this song in my life.
That's terrifying, man. That sounds so stressful.
And so we get to the end of the gig. By the end of the 3 hours of playing, it had been like 75% songs not from the list that I'd spent 2 months practicing.
Wow. That's horrible.
And the best part is this band leader wants no gaps in sound between songs. Mm-hmm. And so he would start the click for the next song while the song you're playing is still happening. And so, like, you get to the end of the song and you're hearing these two different rhythms, and then all of a sudden you're in the next song. And it's like, I missed so many entrances because you're playing, I don't know, you're playing like, I had a feeling tonight's going to be a good night. And then it's like, Tennessee whiskey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's just like, oh my God.
And how would you get Tennessee whiskey up fast enough?
That's your problem.
God.
That you don't. Luckily, Tennessee whiskey is really easy.
How did other people were fine with this? Whether it was a pianist and a drummer and
I mean, a lot of them are used to it. A lot of them just know these songs because they're in the wedding band circuit. And so, like, they just know every song. I don't know. Like, I left the gig, like, how do you prepare for this gig? Just know every song.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you think you'll get asked back?
Yeah. They asked me for another. I couldn't do it, but the band leader was happy with me. He like fist bumped me. He's like, "I'll see you on the next one."
Well, that's good.
I mean, I don't think I nailed it. I felt like I did as well as I could have.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if they were happy,
I didn't feel like I bombed, but I definitely didn't feel like that was as well as I've ever played.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds so stressful.
I couldn't believe it. Like, I feel like my heart sank a little. Like, he's like, boot, scoot, and boogie. And it's like, okay, that's not on the list.
Yeah.
And it's just like another one and another one and another
so,
one. It's like, how is this happening?
No Sweet Child of Mine?
No, they didn't do that one. They did Don't Stop Believing, which I got through. And it's just like that opening thing. I can't do it. It's too fast. I can't do the sex tuplets that fast.
Still, you did something then, right?
I just did 16th notes.
I'm sure that's fine.
I can't go.
Yeah.
I can't do it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Dang. Well,
it was good.
And
trial by fire.
I won't say how much it is, but yeah, it sounds was it worth it for the pay? I guess.
The next the gig they just asked me to do was $475, but
that's nice.
I can't do it, so
sorry.
Anyway, it happens. I think I probably will get more with them though.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool.
Yep.
Wow. Yep. Okay. Cool. Well, good talking.
Yep.
Till next week.
Yeah. Oh, we have to move our gig. We do have a gig coming up.
Yes, that's
so
right.
So it's not the date I said last week or the actual date.
Yeah, which wasn't even the actual date.
Right.
It's not the 23rd or 24th.
To March 15th because I messed up and double booked myself that whole weekend.
Yeah.
And I screwed up like 4 gigs. So.
Yeah. You know, when I start to think that there's something to all of this, like astrology stuff.
Oh?
So I have 2 ex-girlfriends that have that birthday.
March 15th?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay, you got to do a bunch of breakup songs then.
Apparently.
Nice. That's like anti-Valentine's Day.
Yeah, I know. That's funny.
Wow.
But it just means that I shouldn't ever be with anybody with that date, though, if anything, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Nice. That's also South by Southwest is going on that weekend.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so it's going to be crazy. But I was going to see
awesome.
So I don't have anything that Saturday. Maybe we can get a something.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm down. We can do both nights.
Cool.
She's up for whatever. So
hell yeah. All right.
Sweet. Cool. All right.
Well, tune in next week for more Oliver Sacks.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sounds good.
All right.
See ya.
Bye.